I don't know if you've seen the news reports, but currently military intelligence analysts are examining a very unique videotape that has just emerged from the border between Afghanistan and Pakistan. It's a video of Osama bin Laden. He is teaching the troops about the next phase of jihad against the West. He's standing in front of a dry erase board. And written on the board are the words in Arabic, "The long-awaited enlightened one." Now, analysts have been looking at this tape for the last 2 weeks, and only now is it beginning to dawn on them that what Osama has done is he has made a claim. Since September the 11th, 2001, most watchers of the Muslim world have expected that Osama bin Laden, if he survived, would ultimately proclaim himself the new caliph. Caliph is a title that was given to the early Muslim military and political leaders. It is an honorific title. It can only be claimed by those who have proven themselves both in the field and who have the undying support of what are called the legions, literally the masses. But the long-awaited enlightened one is not a caliph. Instead, the long-awaited enlightened one is the promise of a messianic figure known as the Mahdi. Now, if you know anything about Islamic history, you know probably that about every 100 years or 150 years or so, rumors of the Mahdi once again emerged. The last time we saw Mahdi fervor was during World War I, during the time when our present Middle East was actually framed and formed. The old structure of the Ottoman Empire collapsed under the weight of both the pressure from the Allies in the West and internal nationalistic strife. A new Middle East emerged amidst all of this fervor. In fact, if you trace Mahdi fanaticism through the ages over the last 700 or 800 years, one of the things that you see is that it is when piety in the Muslim world is at an all-time low, poverty is at an all-time high, Islam is isolated from the rest of the world and excluded from the rest of the world's greatest blessings, the blessings of freedom, opportunity, or prosperity. It's then that this messianic turmoil starts to turn up. Now, what's interesting about the story of the Mahdi, which is not in the Quran, but is in the Hadith, which is a collection of additional teachings that Muslims follow. What's interesting about the story is that the Mahdi, according to the prophecies, will only come on the scene in the last days. And the Mahdi will appear to the masses of the oppressed Muslim brothers. And he will defeat an antichrist-like figure who is the great Satan, the great oppressor of the Muslim peoples, personified by some great imperial national power with dominion over the course of the whole world. And this Mahdi will appear out of the desert. He will appear bearing the name of the prophet himself and even be able to trace his own bloodline back to the prophet's family. Interestingly, Osama bin Laden, since September the 11th, 2001, has been signing his name Osama bin Muhammad bin Laden, rather than just Osama bin Laden. It's not his given name, but he is claiming the name of the prophet. And now, apparently, he's claiming that he is indeed the Mahdi. Many of those who are currently at the holding center in Cuba, Guantanamo Bay, many of those say that they actually joined Al-Qaeda because they believe that Osama is in fact the Mahdi. Many of the current spate of radical jihad websites that proliferate all over the web, and you can find them easily by Googling. Although if you've got a police record, I don't recommend it. But many of them are doing recruitment for Muslims to go and fight the great Satan in Iraq, right where Dave is taking me this week. To fight against the great Satan under the leadership of the Mahdi, Osama bin Laden. Now, what's really interesting about this is that in the last days, according to the Hadith prophecies, the Mahdi will appear side by side with Jesus. And together, the Mahdi and Jesus, the resurrected Jesus, will free the oppressed peoples of the earth. Now, during World War I, British intelligence and American intelligence realized that Mahdi fervor was actually behind many of the greatest catastrophes in the Middle East. This is what Lawrence of Arabia was actually having to deal with, and why it was he actually recruited the sheriff of Mecca, who was the leader of the Hashemite clan, to actually guide British intelligence and ultimately divvy up the spoils in the Middle East. That's why a Hashemite son wound up on the thrones of what is today Saudi Arabia, what is today Iraq, and what is today Jordan, as well as pretenders to the throne in Syria, and a real threat to the Shah in Iran. Obviously, only one Hashemite royal remains, and that is the king of Jordan. But it was the British plan to foil Mahdi fervor by bringing the Hashemites onto the scene. Many of you have read John Buchan's wonderful World War I novel entitled Green Mantle, which is all about the rise of a pretender to the mantle of the Mahdi. This is serious, serious stuff. Because when Mahdi fervor sweeps through the Islamic world, all of the grave difficulties that the Islamic world faces seem to just melt away in the face of a new level of fanaticism. Mahdi fervor historically has only emerged when Islamic piety is at an all-time low and poverty is at an all-time high, as I said a moment ago. In other words, when Islam has lost its kick, its punch, its hold in the hearts of the people. As short a time ago as 1999, the king of Morocco said this: "I fear for the youth of Islam. There is no love for Allah. Their minds have become secular. Their hearts have become cold. The future of Islam is dismal. Unless something dramatic happens, the Islamic world will fade away. Our people are yearning for something more substantial, more spiritual." So here's this crisis, a crisis in Islam. Charismatic leader emerges and in fury strikes at the heart of what is perceived to be the enemy. And suddenly there is this massive revival within Islam. We need to be clear, though, that what the Islamic world is really yearning for is precisely what we have to offer. They're looking for Jesus. They're looking for the Mahdi to appear beside Jesus in this confused vision to restore justice and peace and harmony and opportunity to the world. They're looking for freedom. They're looking for all of the things that the gospel can bring them. According to the Hadith, the Mahdi will smite the enemies of righteousness and truth and bring a new hope to the heart of the people of Islam. What's really interesting about this is that the Hadith acknowledges that hope cannot be had apart from this messianic figure. But we need to understand that Islam, in its normal state, does not afford that hope. Islam is not a faith that is oriented to man. In a wonderful book entitled Asia's Religions by the former professor at Gordon College, an escapee from the communist oppression in China, a fellow by the name of Litzen Chang has written this wonderful glimpse of the great religions of Asia. He has a chapter on Islam. He's got chapters on Zen and Buddhism and Taoism and Confucianism. And it's very helpful because it's written from a non-American perspective, an Asian perspective, a perspective of someone who has grown up under the tyranny of these various religious systems. But he says, when we look at the pillars of faith in Islam, there are several things that we need to understand. First of all, Islam ultimately ignores personal holiness. Islam is not a religion of personal holiness. It doesn't call for piety. It doesn't call for devotion. It doesn't call for a heart given over to the things of God. It calls for discipline. It calls for an adherence to law. It is a religion of a law code. It is a religion of self-righteousness. Secondly, he says, it is a despotic religion in the sense that it reduces God to the category of the will. The chief attributes of Allah are sovereignty, ruthlessness, and omnipotent. Although he is merciful, he is only merciful in winking at the sin of his favorites in times of war. This is one of the reasons why an Islamic terrorist can live it up. Go drinking, go partying, go womanizing the night before he becomes a suicide bomber. Because that is his trump card. Because this is a works righteousness religion, all he has to do is pull the ultimate trump card, and he has a do not go to jail card ready to pull at any time. Third, Dr. Chang says, it is an impersonal religion. Allah is different from God the Father. Allah's character is impersonal and indestructible substance, a psychical or spiritual in nature, reflecting within itself the whole universe. Fourth, he says, it is pantheistic and imperialistic. Fifth, he says, it is deistic. Muhammad's notion of God is that he is eternally separated from his creation and emotionally detached. There is no notion of Allah's love. No notion of his grace. He is a great shake in the sky. Sixth, he says, it is formalistic. One author calls Islam the worst form of monotheism because in Islam, there is this vision of God, but there is no vision of man. There are claims of the deity, but no rights for humanity. There is authority, but no freedom. And thus, Islamic societies necessarily sow seeds of despotism and tyranny throughout all of time. Muhammad teaches God above us. Moses teaches God who reaches for us through the promise of the Messiah. Now, I run through all of that real quickly to give you a sense of how similar the world of Islam is to your lost friends and neighbors who believe that the way to heaven is their own works righteousness, that their own adherence to some discipline, some standard, to reach high enough, to go far enough, to dig deep enough, to be what God requires, to attain to some artificial standard, and to hope that they've gone just far enough. Here's the bottom line. The very hunger that creates the sort of nationalistic fanaticism that drives Mahdi fervor, that has caused the horrors of September the 11th, 2001 to become a drawing card, that actually works in our favor. Because in the end, what they're really looking for is what everybody else is looking for. They're looking for the hope of the gospel. They just don't know it. So the question is, in the midst of this hardened sort of worldview, in the midst of this polarized global situation, in the midst of these heightened emotions, in the midst of the polarization of nationalistic ideals, how do we communicate the gospel? Well, there are several things that we need to go ahead and upfront confess. The first is that the Church of Jesus Christ has never done a very good job in reaching the Muslim world. For one reason or another, the Muslim world has always pretty much just freaked us out. Always. There's a brand new paperback edition of a book by Charles Kimball out. Charles Kimball is a professor of religion and the chair of the Department of Religion at Wake Forest University. He is an ordained Southern Baptist minister with his THD from Harvard University. All of which should tell you he's a bad guy. No. He's got this new book entitled When Religion Becomes Evil. And of course, it's got Christians on the cover, crusaders. He identifies 5 warning signs of when religion becomes despotic. The first great warning sign is any religion that actually believes that it has absolute truth is on the road to despotism. Secondly, any religion that actually calls for genuine obedience to a sovereign is on the road to despotism. It's dangerous. Third, any religion that actually believes that God is in control of time and that there is a beginning and that there is an end is a dangerous, evil religion. Fourth, any religion that actually believes that, that morality is measured against some sovereign or revealed standard rather than the common sense of mankind is a dangerous, evil religion. And fifth, any religion that actually believes that it has a mandate to bring its message to the rest of the world is a dangerous, evil religion. The bottom line for Kimball is that the only part of faith that is commendable is doubt. It's only when we doubt the truth, it's only when we doubt our own message, it's only when we doubt God that we're actually commendable as religious folk. In other words, it's only our questions that make us virtuous. It's our answers that make us wicked. This book reminded me of why it is that the Christian world has been so ineffective in addressing the tyranny, the oppression, the destruction of lives, the destruction of women, the destruction of children, the destruction of economies, the destruction of art and music and literature, all the fruit that Christianity has brought to the West. Why it is that the Christian world has been so ineffective in addressing Islam is because we believe in our doubt more than we believe in our faith. We believe that our doubt is the basis of democratic freedom. We believe that our doubt is the basis of tolerance. We believe that our doubt is the means by which we show forth to the world the kinder, gentler side of the Christian faith. You know what the world needs to see? The world needs to see Christians who actually believe in Jesus as much as those detainees in Guantanamo believe in Osama. What the world really needs to see in us is no waffling, no wiggling, no wavering, no hedging, no more caveats. They need to see Christians who actually know the Word, love the gospel, and are passionately won by the grace and the mercy of a loving, personal God. See, the essence of Christianity is not a law code. The contrast for the world of Islam should be stark. But what do we offer the world? We offer the world one more law code. Our faith tells us that the essence of the gospel is grace and mercy and freedom and opportunity and empowerment. The setting free of souls and cities and nations and cultures to thrive, to flourish under the hand of a merciful, loving, just God. What do we present to the world? Strong arm of opposition, sense of horror, debating points. Long ago, I learned in street evangelism, back in my early Jesus movement days. So I was trained by guys from the World Liberation Front in Berkeley and Jews for Jesus and the folks from Campus Crusade and Navigators. The thing that I learned most was, number one, always be clear about the gospel itself. Make sure that the words you use are actually the words of Scripture, not some conjured apologetic in your mind. And secondly, actually talk to people. Not to potential converts, and not to numbers on the streets. Look into the eyes of people. Learn the names of people. Hear the stories of people. Because Christianity is personal. It's about relationships. It's about a relationship with the living God that we can enter into because of the eternally satisfying sacrifice of the Lord Jesus that has brought us near and covered us with his righteousness so that we have relationship with God and relationship with each other. See, this is the stark contrast with Islam. This is the gospel. So here's the bottom line. How do we bring the gospel to the Muslim world? Well, we don't bring the gospel to the Muslim world through some world mobilization strategy. Jesus already gave us the strategy. Go you therefore into all the world. And what do you do when you go? Well, you teach. You disciple. And you baptize. It's a very simple plan. It involves people loving people. People connecting with people. People going to people. It involves boldness and danger. It involves risk and hazard. It involves relationship. When I talk to folks about Muslim evangelism, one of the first things that I ask are a few questions like, how many Muslims do you actually know? Invariably, the answer is none. Invariably. Well, I see this guy, he works at the cleaners I use. And there's a guy I buy coffee from every morning. And there's a fellow who works in the same building as I do on the third floor. And, yeah. And I met a guy when I was going to college. He lived in the same dorm, second floor, 3 doors down. That's hardly effective for evangelism. You've got Muslims in your neighborhood. You cross paths with Muslims all the time. The first step to winning Iraq is winning your neighborhood. And one of the things that I love so much about Servant Group is that Servant Group was born partly out of a vision for world missions. It was born out of a vision that came from simply praying for the peoples of the earth. Dave and Robin Dillard's story is wonderful. It's a wonderful story. I love the way Wally tells it particularly because their stories are interwoven, and it's a story of how God takes a prayer concern and turns it into a global concern and then turns it almost immediately into a local concern. But that's how our consternation about September 11th, about the rise of Mahdis, about yet another wave of terrorist bombings in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, that's where that ought to drive us. It ought to drive us back to what we already know. See, I don't know if you came this morning thinking, okay, good, Dr. Grant's going to give us new strategies for how to reach the Muslim world. You know what? There are no new strategies. If I were to bring you a new strategy, I hope that you would get up and walk out of here in a huff. That's the stuff of heresy, y'all. Ain't no new stuff. There are no new circumstances, no new ideas out there that need to be confronted in new ways. Solomon said it well, there is nothing new under the sun. This business with the Mahdi didn't catch God by surprise and doesn't alter the strategy for the gospel. Look, God has called us to love and win Iraq. But the only way that we can love and win Iraq is if we love and win Iraqis. And the only way we can love and win Iraqis is if we know them. We know their names. We know their children. We've had meals together. We've walked together. We've struggled with ideas like, how do we start a small business in the outskirts of Kirkuk? How do we find the money to get this father of five a new taxi cab? How do we educate the covenant children within the fledgling church? How do we make sure that we're gracious to our Muslim neighbors, even in the face of their taunts and their assaults? How do we go where we're afraid to go? That's the essence of it. That's the heart of the gospel. In light of the anniversary of the World Trade Center and Pentagon terrorist assaults, which we will memorialize tomorrow, in light of the apparent rise of a new pretender to the mantle of the Mahdi, in light of the fact that American young men and women are dying on almost a daily basis in the streets in and around Baghdad, it is incumbent upon those of us who know that we have the only answer to live like it. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you some homework. Start with something really simple, and then I'm going to build to something really hard. Here's the simple thing. I want you to find the Muslims that are already in your life. I want you to look around and see them. When I used to work with relief and development organizations both in the United States and abroad, one of the things that I often would tell workers is that the poor are often invisible. You notice this real quick in big cities like Washington, D.C., or New York, or Chicago. You can be walking down the street, and you'll notice the guys who are asleep on the heating grates. They're invisible, or almost invisible. You see guys going to work, and they just step over them. They never even see them. They walk right on past, and they're invisible. And if you say, did you see the guy that you just stepped over? They would say, I don't think I did. Most of our world is invisible to us because we don't have eyes to see it. But if we commit ourselves to have eyes to see the lost, eyes to see those who are crying out for some connection, for something personal. See, here's the thing. In the Muslim world, hospitality is a really big deal. Friendship, family, clan, tribe. These are the organizing features of life because they have no epistemological or ontological satisfaction in their relation to Allah. And so they're yearning, they're grasping for something real. They need to know people. Oftentimes, because of suspicion or prejudice or fear, it's difficult to break through. But it is amazing what kindness, what genuine concern can actually do. There's a guy, he works in a convenience store down the street from where I live. The convenience store is on the wrong side of Highway 96 for me. It's not very convenient for me to get over there. If you know anything about Highway 96, it's a death trap. And so to cross Highway 96 for me is often dangerous, but I do it every single chance I can get because I want to be able to talk to Ahmad. Ahmad has been here in the United States for 12 years. He knows no Americans. He's been here for 12 years. I mean, sure, he's got a boss who's an American, and sure, he's got a supervisor who's an American, and he has co-workers who are Americans, but I found out he's never been in an American home to have a meal. His kids have never been invited over to play with American kids. Never in 12 years. I tell you, it took me 12 or 15 visits before I could even really get him to actually look up and look me in the eye. The only reason I knew his name was because of the name tag. But I would go in there and I would hunt for stuff to buy. After a while, there's just not much to buy in a convenience store. I mean, I'm buying peanuts and motor oil just for a chance to go in and say, "Hi, Ahmad, how you doing?" We've started conversing. I've invited him to several events. I asked him, "You ever been to a football game?" "Titans? Titans? You know Titans? This is a big deal." So we start talking Titans, and he told me about a week ago, he said, "You're the only person I've ever met who's actually a Christian." Now, of course, he meets Christians every day. But he wouldn't know it. So here's homework task number 1. Find the Muslims in your world. Find them. Seek them out. See them. Here's homework task number 2. Learn their name. Call their name. Speak to them. Engage them. Say something more than "Good morning, have a good day, thank you." It's astonishing what little snippets of conversation would do. I've been amazed with Ahmad just watching over the course of the last couple of weeks. You know the old game when you were a little kid? Well, maybe some of you didn't do this, but I was a destructive little brat. I would take my dad's hammer out, and I would go and just start tapping on a corner of the driveway on the concrete. Just light little taps. Nothing happens for the first 20 or 30 taps, but then all of a sudden little cracks appear. Oh, that is so cool. Little cracks start to appear, and before long, you've got gravel where once there was driveway. Little taps of kindness in a life will open it up. We have so many of the elite of the world of the Middle East right here in Middle Tennessee. They go to Vanderbilt. They work for tech firms. They struggle to make ends meet. Some of them open little restaurants. Some of them work for others in convenience stores or at mechanics shops or at dry cleaners or donut shops. They're all around us. We have, in a sense, the United Nations right here on our doorstep. Open your eyes. Learn their names. Win the world. Third, this is getting a little harder. Learn some Arabic phrases and say hello to them in their own language. Say thank you to them in their own language. I mean, just learn 5 words. 5 words. Hello, goodbye, thank you, my, you look marvelous. It's astonishing how startling that is. Here they are in a sea of alien, impersonal hostility, they think. And along comes somebody who calls their name and acknowledges their value and their worth. Just Learn their words. A little bit harder. Speak to them of the love of Jesus. Not just the love of Jesus for them, the love of Jesus for you. The love of Jesus for the world. Express to them should problems come up, which it takes a long time for anything personal or problems of any kind to come up. But should they, commit to pray. Then remember to speak about them again. I mean, you know all this stuff, right? I mean, none of this is new. This is what you already know. This is how we communicate true Christianity to the Muslim world. Now, obviously, this next week, we have a team going to Iraq. And we're going to have to jumpstart some of these relationships. We're going to have to do some things like what I'm talking about, but all pumped up on steroids. Because we got a limited amount of time and we've got responsibilities to fulfill. But I can tell you, no matter how powerfully Dave may preach, no matter how effectively this trip is organized, no matter how brilliantly this conference is pulled together, if we don't believe what the world wants us to doubt, then we're not going to be able to accomplish very much at all. We'll be ducking bullets. We'll be running from danger. We'll be catching a few opportunities for photo ops so that we can come back and raise more money for another boondoggle trip, which, alas, is the story of American missions to the Islamic world. But if we go, knowing that ours is not an impersonal, deistic, formalistic God, and we live like it, if what we offer the Muslims is not just one more law code, one more governmental system, if what we offer them is relationships, commitment, covenant, mercy, grace, justice, and they can see it in our relationships with each other and with them, then, brothers and sisters, I want to tell you, this could be one of the most historic and exciting trips that any of us have ever dreamed of. We have opportunities to speak with leaders within the Kurdish community. We have opportunities to bring together pastors who have not spoken to each other in more than 1,000 years in these churches. Byzantine Catholics, Roman Catholics, Nestorians, evangelicals brought together to hear about their common bond in Jesus. If we actually will offer them what their Mahdi yearning hearts desire, they will see Jesus. And you know what? If Iraq is won, it will shake the world. It'll shake America, a nation where gay bishops are out of the closet and the 10 Commandments are in it. It will shake the world. If we would just believe what the world wants us to doubt. That's how you communicate true Christianity to the Muslim world. Questions then? That's a great question. When you're speaking with a Muslim, particularly a Muslim from the intellectual community, will you face apologetic dilemmas, and will you need to have good apologetic answers? The answer is only partly yes. Remember that Islam is not essentially doctrinal. So if you run into philosophical apologetic questions. They're likely to be the same kind of philosophical and apologetic questions that you would receive from any secular doubter. They're not going to be the sort of doctrinal quibbling that we tend to think might be the problem. In other words, Islam really is a series of disciplines. It's not a series of doctrines. It really is a series of actions, not a collection of philosophies. And so if you're going to get questions, you're going to get the same kinds of questions that you'd get from a Vanderbilt postgraduate. And those are questions like, well, yeah, but what about the Salem witch trials? Well, yeah, what about the Crusades? Well, yeah, what about the Inquisition? Well, yeah, what about George W. Bush? And those are questions that we obviously, as Christians, need to be able to have substantive answers. Better answers than, well, yeah, that was bad. Which is what normally Christians do. I mean, quite frankly, that's our default mode. Oh yeah, that was bad. But that's not really what Christianity is all about. But we have to have more substantive answers than that. But those are not uniquely Islamic questions. The real dilemma in overcoming barriers with Islam really are those interpersonal things. Understanding that our vision of the Lord God Jehovah is that the Lord God Jehovah, from Genesis 1:1 all the way to the end of the book of Revelation, is a God of love, of mercy, of justice, of compassion, of grace.
Dr. Grant, let me put you on the spot. Let's say I'm Ahmad or Aman, which that you've met?
Ahmad.
Ahmad. Let's say my wife is going in for surgery. How do you comfort me or bring the gospel and biblical truth into that?
Well, that's a great illustration because Ahmad's little girl went in to have her tonsils out. And he was absolutely terrified. He was distraught. He thought that there was a very good chance that she would die. And for good reason. In Egypt, she might really have died. And he amazingly told me about this, just kind of in passing. I think because he was so distraught and because my little hammer of compassion had worn away. And I said, oh, well, would you mind if I prayed for you? And we're standing in line at the Mapco Express. And he says, oh, no. We must not. We must not. I'm on the cash register. And I said, well, I'll wait. When's your next break? And he said, oh, no, we must not. There is a supervisor. Separation of church and state. I said, well, it's okay, Ahmad, because I'm not from the government. And neither are you. And he said, oh, well, maybe after this customer. And so he took care of the next customer. The Mapco Express was at that point empty. I reached over and touched him. He flinched. I reached over and touched him, and I prayed for his daughter. And I looked up afterwards, and he was just weeping. He was just weeping. He needed a touch. He needed a care. I went in a week later, and he said, with a beaming smile, she is well. She likes Jell-O.
Tom, do you have a quick one?
Actually, the question is it okay to ask questions about their faith? Actually, sometimes that's a great segue because their faith, quite frankly, is so unsatisfying at a personal level. They're very proud of it because it imposes discipline. It sets them apart from sloppy, slovenly, unwashed masses like we Americans and Christians. And there is that sense of pride, and it is genuine pride because it's works righteousness. It definitely breeds pride. And so they like talking about it. But what's interesting is that it always exposes the impersonalness of it, the fact that it is works righteousness. And that becomes the perfect segue, once again, for the message of grace. Hammer on the gospel. Hammer on the grace. This is great hope. I have a dear friend who was raised in an Orthodox Jewish home in Brooklyn, New York. And he's now pastor of a wonderful little church called Messiah's Congregation in New York. And they have a wonderful ministry to Russian immigrant Jews in this little church in Brooklyn. And one of the things that they are able to do is they are able to actually understand the works righteousness that these Russian Jews are bound up in. And so when they present the hope of the gospel, it is such a contrast. The antithesis between the city of God and the city of man is so great, so profound, and it is so alluring that Jews who don't want to talk about Jesus are doing this kind of thing the whole time. They just, hold them back. I don't want to hear about this, but love me more. And what they have found is that, persistence in a situation like that, understanding the culture, provides wide open doors.